Today I'm going to be photographing ducks on the water with nice autumnal reflections, and what I'm going to do is take you through everything from how I choose the location to how I assess the situation, the lighting and the settings I'm going to use as well. So one of the main reasons here for choosing this location is actually due to the trees that are surrounding the water. So behind me you've got some really nice woodland that's going to reflect in the water all year round. It's probably going to look pretty good at any time, but even in the autumn it's going to look even better when the colours are at their peak, as they almost are now. There's not a really obvious boundary, there isn't a horrible fence or anything by the edge of the water, so that should merge into the water a little bit better. And what really helps as well is that this little corner here is much more sheltered, so it's kind of at the western end, and we tend to have a prevailing westerly breeze here in the UK, very common. So at this end it means it should always be a bit more sheltered. Even taking that into account, I've still tried to come when the winds are pretty low, so I think the winds were maybe about 8 miles an hour, which isn't too bad. So down in this little corner you can actually see I've got my camera set up down here. This is much more sheltered, which means I'm more likely to get those calmer waters and better reflections. In the other direction, where it's more open, the wind is actually already catching the water. You see the ripples, and then when that happens it's just going to reflect the light, and it just totally destroys any background reflections that you're going to get. So as I mentioned, the first thing to decide on is the position, and along here there's not really many places where you can get close to the water, but this is absolutely perfect. There's nothing in the way, you can almost get right down to the water's edge. And in terms of the height, so I've got the tripod today. I could have brought the frying pan, if you've seen that, the fantastic device that I've got. The frying pan device, if you've seen that in other videos, that's really good if you want to get very close to the water and almost get as close as possible to the water surface. The only problem with that sometimes is that you sometimes get this line, which you can actually see in the video now. So where, if you look across to the bank on the other side of the water, where it meets the water, you'll sometimes get this line. And if you're really low down, which I tend to prefer because I just love that effect, but that is the problem, that sometimes you get this line coming through and it can almost kind of like cut through the bird sometimes. Now if you're using a really wide aperture like f4 with the big lens, then you can probably blur that enough so it's not a problem, but it's something I'm always aware of. So today I've got the tripod. That gives me the option. I can have it as it is now, which is still relatively low, but a couple of feet off the ground. And then what that means is I'm still low, so I'm going to get fairly intimate looking shots, but I won't get that line in the background, so it should be complete, nice clear water around the bird. And then if I want to, I've got the option with this tripod to just completely flatten the legs, and I can get it directly on the ground, and it's almost as low as it would be with the other device. So I've got the big lens on the gimbal head today, and a lot of people ask me what head this is, and it's a Movo GH700, which is relatively inexpensive. It's not the best one on the market, but I think it does a pretty good job. Now I've got this on my Enduro tripod, and it's really important that I try and get the tripod as level as I can, because otherwise when I'm moving the gimbal around, it's going to go completely off. It's not going to be level anymore once it gets sort of past, I don't know, about 90 degrees. So I'm trying to make sure the tripod is as level as I can get, which is often difficult on uneven ground, but I've got a little spirit level there. I love this tripod, but for some reason the spirit bubble broke. How can the spirit bubble break? I don't know, but it did. So what I've done is just get this little cheap one, and I've just gaffer taped it onto the top of the tripod, and I've just got this, in fact I've got it almost perfectly level, which I never ever do, but that is dead center, so any movement I get now, it should stay nice and level the whole way through that movement. And the other thing to consider is comfort. So if you're going to be kneeling or lying down, you want to try and make yourself a little bit more comfortable. If you can, you're more likely to wait for longer, and you've more chance of getting better pictures. So after seeing Espen the other week with his mat, I forgot I'd got this. It's like a yoga or fitness mat. So I did bring that along. I was going to lie down on that. But for my positioning and actually being higher up, I'm just kneeling a lot. So I've just got myself one of those little mats to kneel on or sit on, and that's working okay. Also today I've got this angle finder, so I think most of the time when you're working very low, an angle finder is just a little bit more comfortable. exposure, I'm actually using aperture priority. The light is a little bit different further out as opposed to close in, where I'm slightly under shade with the trees. So because of that, I'm using aperture priority, so I don't have to worry about changing it as much. And it's often a balancing act. So for me, I'll often try and fine-tune the other parts of the exposure. So I want to use an ISO that's going to give me a fast enough shutter speed to stop the movement of the ducks, but I don't want to use an ISO that's so high it's going to get too grainy. So at the moment I've got ISO 1600 at f5, and that's giving me a shutter speed around about 400th. So that's not massively fast, so that means I've got to use good technique. So I can either do that and try and use really good technique to get a sharp picture, or I can put the ISO up to give me a faster shutter speed, but then it's going to be grainier. So I would rather try and rely on my technique than get too grainy a picture. And f5 is wider than I'd often use, but again, I'm trying to balance it. It's often a balancing act. What I tend to do is kingfisher. Silent kingfisher, that's unusual. And then what I'm doing is looking at the exposure meter, so either on the top or when I'm looking through the viewfinder, and I'm pretty much going with that near to the middle. Most of the time I'm actually exposing the shots, but I'm overexposing the shots by plus a third, so plus a third of a stop exposure compensation, because I find I'm getting a more accurate exposure with that. So if I do need to alter the exposure, then it's just a case of using my thumb on the back dial and just quickly tweaking that dial, and it'll change my exposure. I've also got the servo autofocus selected as well, because the ducks, even if they're relatively still, they're still usually drifting a bit, so I'm keeping that continuous tracking on. It's definitely raining now. I do like the water. I love water droplets. Droplets actually hitting the water are very nice. It's just the light level's so low, it's difficult to photograph anything moving. What we can do is try. So I actually took the angle finder off, because down here with the tripod flat on the ground, I actually felt more comfortable just use the viewfinder and just kind of have my elbows, but it's never comfortable. So for this I've decided actually to take this off and just use the viewfinder. There was a tiny bit of brightness there, just, I don't know, for about 10 minutes, just the sun trying to come through the cloud, which it's not going to do, but just a slight bit of brightness, which just made all the difference, just lifted the images. It's improved it slightly, but the light is still really overcast. And that's the problem. If you're shooting images like this where you're trying to get reflections in the water, you pretty much have to have some light. You really need to have some light, not so much on the birds themselves, but more on the actual background, on those colours that are going to reflect. That's what gives you that really nice vibrance to the image. Now in terms of the focus point, I am changing the focus point. I usually work with one single focus point, which is what I'm doing at the moment. I'm using the centre one if I think the composition works for that, focusing on the head, and if the composition's okay, I'll stick with that because it's the more sensitive one. So if the ducks are further away, I'm probably using the centre focus point. When they actually start to come quite close and filling the frame more, then I'm moving the focus point towards the top, so just above the centre, or maybe the highest one above the centre. And the reason for that is if you focus on the head in that way, then you're going to get a better composition all round. Oh, it's fantastic. I don't know if you can tell the difference. After that little rain shower, when I thought that was it, all of a sudden the sun just came, and just a little bit of brightness just poking through the clouds, and it's just lit up. I'll adjust the exposure a bit so you can see it a bit better. We're just totally lighting up the colours in the background. Damn tree roots. Oh. A pair of tufted ducks. Oh, there's a lovely tufted duck here. It might come a bit closer if I wait. Oh, it's a bit far away. Those colours are absolutely awesome. Man, just absolutely glowing. It must be like 3:30 by now. You might notice as well in some of those shots that line that I talked about earlier through running through the frame, and that's one of the things that happens sometimes if you get down really low like I am at the moment. So to avoid that, for some shots I just tried to compose the duck so that it was at the top of the frame, and then that means that I can just completely keep out that line. So it's still there, I've just basically brought the camera down a bit. I'm basically now getting like, I'm working around ISO 1600, about f5.6, I'm getting about 1,000th of a second, so I've been able to adjust all three things, and those are the kind of settings you want to work with. Absolutely ideal. I took some lovely shots there of male and female mallard, and both were doing quite a lot of dabbling, so one of the things I did was actually turn the camera around vertically to try and get reflection of the duck underneath as well. But much better light, and also that's bumped up the shutter speeds, so I've not done anything, I've just left it on AV, maybe changed the ISO slightly, but basically as the light levels have gone brighter, the shutter speeds just automatically increased, so that's made it easier to get a sharp image. With the exposure, they're kind of slightly in the shade and the background's lit, so I was going about +2/3, even sometimes +1 above what the exposure meter was saying. That was giving me a really nice exposure. Oh, my neck hurts, my ankles hurt, my knees hurt, but it was good fun, and surprisingly got some nice photographs, which I really didn't expect a few hours ago for sure. I hope you've enjoyed this vlog, which has been just me by the edge of a lake, and hope some of those tips were useful. Tried to kind of run you through it, the different things that I do and pay attention to, but here the main thing, to be honest, is the light. And before that light came, and the light is still there now on the water, before that came, the images just weren't really doing anything. You have to have that bit of light to give it that extra pop from those colours and the reflections in the water. I think above all, to be honest, I just enjoyed it. It was like getting back to old school wildlife photography, you know, back when I was a nipper. It's a goosander. Wow, goosanders out there. I'm definitely coming back here. I'm waffling. Those goosanders are awesome. Yeah, it was like getting back to old school photography, and it kind of just reminds me why I do this, and why, you know, sometimes you need to be reminded why you do this and what it was that you loved about it in the first place. And this style of photography, I just get a lot out of it. Really good fun, and just good for you in general, I think. I'll put a couple of videos up on the screen, so if you want to click one of these to see more nature photography with me out in the field, as well as in-depth tutorials which are going to help you with your wildlife photography, and please do subscribe as well. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you somewhere in nature sometime soon.